Hello and welcome back to another Life's Biggest Questions. I'm Charlotte Dobre, and today we're going to answer the question, what if America never existed? Europe began colonizing the North American mainland in the 16th century. The United States emerged from 13 British colonies along the East Coast. There were many disputes between Great Britain and the colonies. After the 7 Years' War, the American Revolutionary War began, also known as the American War of Independence. It was a conflict between Great Britain and its 13 colonies, which eventually declared independence as the United States of America. But what if Britain won that war, and the United States of America was never declared independent? What if America never existed? What would the world look like today? During the 1760s and the early 1770s, the relations between the 13 colonies and Britain became strained. This was because the British Parliament continued to try to govern and tax American colonists. One of the reasons for this rebellion was that Americans feared the British government would increase their taxes. There is one thing that is undeniable. If America never gained its independence, Great Britain would never lose the title of the most powerful country in the world, or at least not until much later. America would have been one of the British colonies, and still under King George III's monarchy rule. At its height, the British Empire was the largest in history, and by far the most powerful. But if the British stopped the American Revolution, the consequences for those who rebelled would have been extremely harsh. The British Army was known for its brutality. When a small group of colonial rebels tried to surrender at Waxhaws, South Carolina in 1780 by waving a white flag, the Redcoats in turn slaughtered all 100 of them. Brits also stuffed American captives into prison ships in New York, where they were fed table scraps discarded by British soldiers. American revolutionaries were traitors in the eyes of the British. King George III famously promised to bring to condign punishment the authors, perpetrators, and abettors of such traitorous designs. When looking at the Scottish Rebellion and how the British executed its leaders, one can assume that the same would have happened to Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. If the American Revolution failed, the British would have probably punished the rebels by making them pay for the cost of the revolt, which turned out to be 80 million pounds. Today, that would be worth 4.9 billion US. In short, post-war colonial America would have been a pretty desolate place. Famine would have been widespread across the country because crops would have been sent to Britain in order to pay the debt. We saw this happen with Ireland. But things wouldn't have been all bad. If America were a British colony, its history would have been entirely different. For example, Britain banned slavery in 1833, and so did its colonies. The American Civil War, which occurred between 1861 and 1865, would have never happened, firstly because, well, America was not an independent nation, but also because the Civil War's underlying cause was slavery. If slavery had been abolished in the colonies at the same time as Great Britain, that terrible conflict would have never happened, and the actual geography of the colonies would have been entirely different as well. A British victory would have prevented colonists from settling in the Midwest. The British wanted to keep much of that region wild and unsettled so they could continue to profit off the fur trade. Native American tribes likely would not have been persecuted in the same way as they had when Americans won their independence. What is present-day Georgia would have been predominantly Cherokee. And then there's the issue of France. France would have also kept much of its territory. Britain likely would have not expanded to the west. But if there were no American Revolution, there might not have been a French Revolution. One of the underlying causes of the French Revolution was its funding and alliance with the US. France was highly in debt because of this, and if it were not in debt from funding the American Revolution, the French monarchy would have kept much of its power. So much would have happened to global history if America never existed. The colonies would have probably evolved in their own way to eventually become independent nations. What do you think would have happened to the world if America never existed? Let us know in those comments down below, as well as any suggestions for topics you would like to see next. I'm Charlotte Dobre for Life's Biggest Questions. Don't forget to like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to our growing channel.